How's it going, Diablo player? So I have the final version of my Frozen Orb build, and this build is an absolute beast. This build is a really good all-round build which can do anything in the game. It clears pit tier 75 plus in less than 2 minutes, no problem. It destroys T4 Infernal Hordes, and it also clears the Infernal Hordes Council within seconds. And even for the hardest tier 4 Tormented bosses like Duriel and Lilith, it clears them within one phase, no problem. And if you're into Kurast Undercity, well, this build is absolutely ridiculous in the Kurast Undercity due to 0-second teleport enchantment cooldown. But before we go into the rest of the showcase and the details of this guide, I just want to make a quick announcement here. You can find this build and all my other build guides on Mobalytics. Just check the description down below. The link to the build will be at the very top, and the very bottom will have a link to all my other build guides. I'm working on updating all my builds on Mobalytics for Season 6. It will take a little bit of time, but I'm sure we're gonna have them all updated for you very soon. So here we are back with the build showcase. What you're seeing in the background right now is a tier 75 pit, which we are clearing in less than 2 minutes. So if you're asking yourself, how do I teleport so fast? We're using the Rakanos Wake Boots, which helps us to reduce the cooldown on our evade charges. And then we use the teleport enchantment together with a lot of cooldown reduction and 5 ranks in teleport, which essentially gives us a permanent teleport enchant, allowing us to move very, very fast. I know this is not Spiritborn, this is Sorcerer, so take this with a grain of salt, that this is just a tier 75 pit, but it's pretty fast, and for Sorcerers is actually pretty good. What's so awesome about this build is that it's relatively relaxed to play, because we're gonna use a little trick to autocast our Frozen Orb, which you can see a little bit later in the guide. The autocasted Frozen Orb, together with the Fractured Winter Glass, is gonna take care of almost everything for us automatically. It's gonna spawn Fire Familiars due to the Fire Familiar snapshotting, which gonna handle free burning for us. It's gonna spawn most of our Lightning Spears and Ice Blades. And then, depending on how relaxed you actually want to play this build, you decide how often you spam your Ice Blades and your Lightning Spear. You don't have to cast them at all if you don't want to. You're gonna be a little bit slower, or you can spam them to be a little bit faster and do a little bit more damage, and it's completely up to you. So while we are looking at a little bit of this T4 Infernal Hordes gameplay, let me tell you that this build is also incredibly tanky, and you will get away with phase tanking almost everything. So in this build, I'm covering a little bit more than in the regular build guides. We're going to have some additional sections, and you want to check the description down below if you're curious in something specific. We're going to have a section for snapshotting Familiar, which basically replaces the Firebolt enchantment. We're going to have a section on the autocasting with the numlock trick. And we're gonna have all the other regular sections in the description of this guide, as well as the planner. And at the end of the guide, I have Infernal Hordes for you, I have Kurast Undercity, we have tier 75 speedrun pit, and I have footage of some bosses and Lilith. So that's it for the introduction of this build, and without further ado, let's start with the skill tree. For the skill tree, we have 2 into Firebolt just to unlock the next skills. We are not using Firebolt nor Firebolt enchant in this build. Then we max out Frozen Orb into Destructive Frozen Orb. We don't need Greater Frozen Orb because the Lightning Spears are gonna fix vulnerable for us anyway. Then we put 3 points into Elemental Dominance, 1 into Flame Shield, 5 into Teleport to Shimmering Teleport here. You want to have 5 because it reduces the cooldown on your Evade Teleport, so definitely put the points in here. Then we max out Glass Cannon, 1 point into Elemental Attunement, 1 into Ice Armor into Mystical Ice Armor here for the extra damage. If you are struggling with survivability, which can happen when you start playing this build, you can definitely go for Shimmering Ice Armor and cast Ice Armor more often. Just in the very late game, you're gonna notice that you don't need Shimmering Ice Armor anymore, that you can go for Mystical Ice Armor and take the nice extra 15% increased damage. Then we go for Ice Blades into Summoned Ice Blades, Lightning Spear into Invoked Lightning Spear. We go for a Defensive Passive Mana Shield, and Protection, 1 into Align the Elements, 3 into Precision Magic for the lucky hit, and 3 into Conjuration Mastery. And then 1 into Familiar and 1 into Enhanced Familiar. So we don't need any of these passives, because here's the thing. We're just gonna do Fire Familiar, so we're not gonna have 2 different ones, so we're not gonna get the 3% damage reduction. And we're also only going to have Fire Familiar, so we don't need 10% extra fire damage, so we can spare this skill point here. Then 1 into Inner Flames and 3 into Devouring Blaze. Then we go for 3 into Permafrost, 3 into Hoarfrost. We don't have points for Icy Touch here, so we're leaving this out since this is the weakest passive. 1 into Unstable Currents and 1 into Prime Unstable Currents. So here also, if you are in the early game, or if you're like not really, if you're struggling with Unstable Currents cooldown reduction, you can, for example, take these 4 points out and put them into Unstable Currents to just get more cooldown. Once you reach certain breakpoints and you have all your gear masterwork to like 12 out of 12, you're only going to require 1 point into Unstable Currents. And then 1 into Causing Currents, 3 into Electrocution for the damage reduction. Obviously, we go for the elemental synergies and the evocation here, and our key passive is going to be Enlightenment. For the skills, we have Frozen Orb here on Autocast, so it says numlock 1. If you don't know what the Autocast with the numlock trick is, just skip to the section with the Autocasting here, and I explain very detailed how you get your Frozen Orb to Autocast. I highly recommend doing this. At least if you're playing on a PC and if you hold a key for Frozen Orb for an extended period of time, you know what? Your fingers and your hand is going to thank you a lot for putting this Frozen Orb here on Autocast. So even if you don't have it on Autocast, basically you want to hold the Frozen Orb key all the time. So Frozen Orb is never going to be not cast. This is your primary spell. You're going to cast it all the goddamn time. Then we have Ice Blades, and you can exchange this for Teleport. It's kind of a personal preference to have another Teleport here. I feel like I don't need it, and Ice Blades gives me a little bit of extra damage and cooldown reduction. Lightning Spear, you want to spam it on cooldown. Then Flame Shield for the survivability and also for the third Tarasha stack. Then we have Unstable Currents, which should have 100% uptime, so you want to also spam this on cooldown. And Ice Armor, just don't forget to cast it. Sometimes I get lazy and I forget to cast Ice Armor, and I'm getting low on barrier, and I'm also losing like a big chunk of damage here. It's not a huge deal because we're not using Storm Swell Aspect in this build, but still, don't forget to cast Ice Armor. Then for the enchantments, we want to have Frozen Orb enchantment, obviously, and we run the Teleport enchantment to make this build move fast. So again, you can run the Firebolt enchantment except for instead of the Teleport enchantment, but with the snapshotting of the familiar, of the Fire Familiar, Firebolt enchantment is just not required anymore, so it is basically a free enchantment slot, and I'm pretty much probably gonna incorporate Teleport enchantment in all of my builds because it's just the strongest enchantment, and really other enchantments are not really just that great. For the items, we use Air of Perdition as an helmet. You want to have upwards of 40% critical strike chance on this one. So if you don't have a greater FX crit chance, you probably want to double masterwork the crit chance. Then Lucky Hit or Core skills are both great. For our chest, we use Raiment of the Infinite, and you want to have greater FX Glass Cannon, and ideally you want to have all ranks in Glass Cannon here. For our gloves, we use the Fists of Fate with a greater FX attack speed and a greater FX lucky hit chance. Highly recommend getting these. They were fairly cheap when I was picking them up. Their value is probably gonna rise. The difference here between regular gloves is not that huge, actually. I was playing gloves with critical strike damage, attack speed, and crit chance, for example, and with a Storm Swell aspect, and the damage output was fairly similar to Fists of Fate. I would say was a little bit less, and the build played a little bit less fluent, and I had a little bit less stagger, but it's definitely playable, so don't sweat it if you don't have this Fists of Fate here. Then for our pants, we just want to have greater FX intelligence, greater FX maximum life if you can get it. We want to master work intelligence here. We need 1 armor roll and a % armor temper. And I feel like for the utility here, the best you can get is barrier generation because you're gonna be relatively low on barrier in this build. And it helps the protection passive to just generate more barrier for you. Then for our boots, we're gonna go Rakanos Wake. You wanna have greater FX cooldown reduction and ideally masterwork that twice. And greater FX non-physical damage is a great pickup here as well. So if you can get these cheap, I would highly recommend picking these up now because these are gonna increase in price significantly. For our weapon, we wanna have a sword ideally. I don't have a sword, but you're gonna have 125% attack speed all the time in this build, and the attack speed frames I checked are the same for sword and dagger. So Ideally, pick up a sword, and you want to have greater FX intelligence, greater FX critical strike damage. You want to have chance for frozen or projectiles to cast twice, and critical strike damage. And ideally, you want a double masterwork frozen orb and one masterwork on critical strike damage. And we put on our splintering energy aspect here. Then for focus, you want to have greater FX cooldown reduction and ideally probably greater FX intelligence, but these are hard to find. Then again, you want to have chance for frozen or projectiles to cast twice and critical strike damage. And ideally, you want to masterwork cooldown reduction once and chance for frozen orb to cast twice. And we play the aspect of frozen orbit, obviously. Then for a ring, you want to have Starless Skies with if you don't have greater FX attack speed, like I don't have, you want to masterwork attack speed probably twice. You can also get away with masterworking it once, and critical strike chance here is also great as well. If you don't have Starless Skies, just take a regular wing with crit attack speed, and you probably want to get something like Unstable Currents cooldown reduction or resource cost reduction. It doesn't really matter so much, the temper, but you want to have crit damage and tempering crit damage. For our other ring, we use Tarasha ring here. You want to have a greater FX cooldown reduction and a high chance, a high percentage for the damage buff here. If you can pick up one which has non-physical damage as well, it's probably great. And you want to ideally masterwork 2 times cooldown reduction and 1 time non-physical damage. And then last but not least, our Winter Glass here. You want to have a greater FX Conjuration Mastery. You want to have as close to 90% lucky hit chance here. And ideally, you want to masterwork all on Conjuration Mastery. So mine is pretty scuffed, actually. So for gems and runes, you definitely want to go for critical strike damage in your weapon and your focus. You want to go all armor in your jewelry. We're not going to have an issue with resistances here, so we are all nice and kept. And you want to go topaz in one of your armor pieces. And then for the runes, you have a couple of different choices. So you can play the Yule Ohm here for getting Warcry. I feel like the uptime on this is roughly 50 to 60, maybe 70% in a boss fight. So this is actually not the strongest rune word. I mean, I would assume it's somewhere around a 10% damage increase, so it's still a nice to have, but it's absolutely not a must. So if you feel like you don't really need it, you don't have to use it. And then for the other one, I'm using basically Tam Kul, which gives me like the Earthen Bulwark of the Druid. So sometimes I run out of barrier because I'm not playing the ice armor, which gets me the cooldown reduction while I use mana. And I feel like this just gives you a nice little extra amount of barrier and adds a lot to survivability. So another good thing you can run is definitely the Tam and Mod here, which gives you Dark Shroud. Gives you a good amount of damage reduction. And I was using this for a long time, so if you're like having trouble staying alive, especially in higher levels of Infernal Hordes, if you're not fully maxed out on the build yet, you might have trouble staying alive, so you can definitely use these. For the Paragon, I didn't include a level 300 planner because, you know what, probably 99.9% of the people are not going to reach Paragon 300. So I have a good 266 points here, and I have a Paragon of 238. And, you know, I'm kind of having all offensive nodes I need now, and everything is now branching into defensive nodes, so you're gonna figure that out. So first of all, we want to get all non-physical damage. Non-physical damage is our primary focus, since Enlightenment is basically gonna triple it. So in our first board, we're going to play the Unleash Glyph here. It gives us an 8% damage increase and another 8% for the legendary bonus. And it's going to increase our non-physical damage. And it's also going to give us dexterity and willpower, which is important to reach our breakpoints. Then we move on to the Frigid Fate board here. Frigid Fate, obviously the strongest node we have. We pick up the lucky hit, we pick up the extra life, we pick up here again the non-physical damage, and we put in our Tactician Glyph. Same story, we want to have the multiplier from Tactician, and we want to boost our non-physical damage, and we pick up all these vulnerable damage and damage reduction nodes here. Then we move over to the Enchantment Master. So if you are not high Paragon level, you know, skip the Enchantment Master node. It's a very expensive node, so you can probably skip this entire cluster here. But it is just a great node, especially if you're running Teleport Enchantment, and also does quite a bit with the Frozen Orb enchantment here. So again, we pick the non-physical damage, and we use our Elementalist Glyph again to boost the non-physical damage, and pick up non-physical damage here. We get some resistance and max life here, and we get some resistance and damage reduction here. Moving over to the next board, that is going to be the Fundamental Release. We'll put our Winter Glyph here, again to move to bump our non-physical damage. If you want to do high-end boss pushing, Winter Glyph basically does nothing against bosses unless they have ads. So Winter is probably a weak glyph against bosses, again, unless they have ads. So, but I feel like for regular content and speed farming, this is the absolute strongest glyph. And again, it's boosting our non-physical damage, and I feel like it's just a great glyph. So we get a shit ton of non-physical damage, which essentially gets tripled. In this board, I just pick up this damage reduction cluster here. There's another damage reduction cluster here, because I don't really need the armor, so I rather do this one here with the maximum life, and we get the damage to burning and crit damage here, obviously. And then our last board is going to be the Icefall. And we pick up the Icefall legendary node here for extra Frozen Orb damage. We pick up these clusters here. As you can see, I don't have this one fully unlocked, so I'm technically missing 20% non-physical damage. And we get these clusters here. And in the Icefall board, I'm playing my Destruction Glyph, because these ones here I don't really want to boost. I don't really care. Yeah, I'm missing like a couple of percentage in damage here, but it's not a huge deal. And Destruction in the 64 Dexterity Glyph board is still pretty strong. And then, you know, all the Paragon points you get is basically just branching out into defenses, right? This is a great cluster here for more maximum life. Then you have these damage reduction clusters here. There's another damage reduction Ores cluster here. And this one here is armor maximum life. So really, everything which comes now is damage reduction, damage reduction, damage reduction. So this is basically where you put all your points. This Paragon board has all offensive points you need built in. So let's take a look at our mercenaries. We're going to take Vajana, because she's going to give us a flat 10% attack speed buff, and that's really all we care about. So we're going to have a flat 10% attack speed buff, and also we're going to have for like 7 seconds, every 22 seconds, we're going to have another 15%. So it's simple as that. That's why I'm using this merc. I feel like the mercs are fairly insignificant in this iteration of the game. We don't really care about this movement speed bonus whatsoever, but the attack speed is just nice. And as our reinforcement, we're using Rare here with the Bastion skill here. This just helps us to mitigate our damage. You can put this on a condition like when you become injured. I personally just put it on Frozen Orbs, so it's active as much as possible. So what are the breakpoints for this build? First of all, you want to be upwards of 95% critical strike chance. Why 95%? Well, Lightning Spear has an extra 5% critical strike chance, so this would be 100% crit for Lightning Spear and 95% crit for Frozen Orb, which is alright. If you cannot make this high breakpoint, right now I'm only using my Air of Perdition with crit and my Starless Skies with crit and my Fist of Fate with crit. So you always have the option to use this extra slot here on your offhand. For example, you could use Intelligence or Life instead. You could use crit. Then it should be absolutely no issue getting this breakpoint. So the attack speed breakpoint for this build is not so incredibly important because we have a lot of inherent attack speed buffs. So ideally, you want to reach roughly 88% attack speed. So as you can see, I have 73% attack speed right now, and that's already including my Elixir of Advantage too. And we're going to add 10% from our Mercenary, so that's 83.5. So we need 88 to reach the 113 frames attack speed breakpoint with Unstable Currents on, and you can see the breakpoints on the screen right now. However, we have two inherent attack speed buffs. First of all, that is going to be the buff from our Mercenary, which is going to be an extra 15%, which is going to be active 7 seconds out of 22. So let's make this 1/3 of the time. And our second buff is going to be the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment has a 20% attack speed buff, which I would say is roughly active 60 to 70% of the time. So theoretically, you know what, there will be very small periods of time where you will not be on the maximum attack speed breakpoints if you don't reach this 88% attack speed. But, you know, most of the time you're going to be at 100 anyway, because you're either going to have the Merc buff or you're going to have the Enlightenment buff. But technically, so if you're playing a Wand and Dagger, it would be 88%. If you're playing a Sword, which would be best for this build, it would be most likely 100%. But again, you know, as long as you are like getting with the Mercenary, like somewhere around 80 to 85 range, you will be at max attack speed most of the time. So how does the autocasting work? So you might notice on my Frozen Orb it says N1 here. So that means numlock 1. So what you want to do is you go to Options and you go to Controls and you're going to bind any skill slot on a numpad. So how you do this, you activate numlock and then you bind it to any key on your numpad. It doesn't matter. It can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Doesn't matter. Just take any one. So once you did that binding, how do you activate autocasting? So you want to make sure numlock is on. So your numlock LED is on. And now you're going to hold the key, which is your key binding. So in my case, numlock 1. And while holding this key, you're going to deactivate numlock. And then you're going to release the key. And now it's just going to cast forever. So this is never going to stop casting, even if you know, open your character sheet or, you know, open your friend list. It doesn't matter. It's just going to keep on casting. And it's a very, very convenient because in this build, you will never stop casting. And the only way you're going to move is use teleport enchant, right? So you just press evade. You're not going to move by clicking left mouse. Even though you can, because using left mouse will interrupt this. So I can just, you know, use my left mouse now and move. It's no problem because you can only basically spam one key at a time. As soon as I release left mouse, it's going to start casting again. Same goes for my skills. So I can hold, for example, Q, right? And it's going to stop casting. Because the way it works, you can only hold one key at a time. That's a limitation on your like Windows computer or whatever, right? So now I'm holding Q. As you can see, it's just casting Ice Blades. And I'm not casting Frozen Heads more. As soon as I release Q, it's going to start casting Frozen Orbs again. So basically what you can do is, you can just autocast and you just press your buttons, right? So I'm just pressing Q and W here to do Ice Blades and Lightning Spears. I can press all the other buttons. I can do my evade teleports, no problem. And it's just going to autocast Frozen Orbs all the time. So this is a very convenient way of playing a build like this, because it's very exhausting if you actually have to hold a key for an extended period of time, and your fingers and your hand is gonna thank you for using this trick. So how do you deactivate it? It's also simple. Just put numlock on again and just press the key once and it's gonna be disabled. So why autocasting might be very convenient, there is a little bit of a downside to it. You cannot instantly click objects. For example, if you can see, like I am autocasting right now, if I try to open this Tortured Gift, it's never gonna work. I'm just clicking on it and it's not gonna happen. So there's a little trick to this. You just don't start in the interaction range. So you go a little bit away, like this. Now you go with your mouse over the object and you hold your left click and it's gonna open. So it's going to be the same for portals in the pit or the boons and banes in the Infernal Hordes. Basically, just go a little bit farther away and then just hold the channeling. So again, I'm showing it again. Let's go to the next chest here. So again, going next to the chest and clicking on it. Nothing is ever going to happen. Now let's just kill these mobs. Go a little bit farther away. Hold it. And it's going to open. Now I have my left mouse. As soon as I release my left mouse button, it's basically just going to start autocasting again. So snapshotting familiar. So we are not playing the Firebolt enchantment anymore because we are snapshotting familiar. So if you look at me, as soon as I start cast Frozen Orbs, you will see I will only spawn fire familiars. So as you can see, like all these little fire guys there, right? So we're only going to spawn fire familiars, which are going to do the burning for us just fine. They move very fast and they apply burning in an AoE, so it's absolutely no problem to use these. So how do we do this? It is actually pretty simple. So what you do is you put the familiar on your bar, right? And you just wait until it displays fire. So if we wait now, so now it displays. Actually, the display doesn't display fire because I don't even know why. So let's just do, right? So we do like ice, and now it's ice, you know? And as soon as we do flame shield one time, it's gonna stay fire forever. So we don't even need to cast it. You can just remove it from your bar now. So now, as soon as it displays fire, you're just gonna remove it from your bar and never put it on there again. And now it's gonna stay fire forever. So if we hit our stuff here again and we start casting Frozen Orb, you will see I will only cast Fire Familiars once again. There's the fire guys. And it's gonna continue forever. So it doesn't even matter if you change areas. You can even log out and log in. You're basically right now snapshotted in a fire familiar and it will be there forever. So you never need to worry about this again. You know, maybe there's some point there's going to be a patch, but I assume this is actually expected behavior because you know what? Your last familiar was fire, which you have cast, and since the Winterglass doesn't cast them, it just automatically spawns them. Now, from this point on, you basically have a free Firebolt enchant because all familiars are gonna be fire. Alright, consumables. So we are always going to use Elixir of Advantage too. We want to have 100% attack speed and the extra lucky is nice, and we cannot really make sense of any of the other elixirs here anyway. And then for your incense, I kind of use these two. So I use the Redamine Bus for 500 extra life. It's like extremely strong. And on top of it, I always use Chorus of War for 40 all stats. Why do I use this? Because you're gonna have trouble reaching the highest breakpoints in your Paragon board. And these 40 all stats, they really help you to get those willpower and dexterity bonuses, which end up being quite a bit of non-physical damage. So highly recommend using these. If you're not maxed on resistances yet, because you're not such a high Paragon level, you can also definitely go for the Soothing Spices here for the extra all res.